myself, Mr. Jadhav sir. I welcome all of you in our Shantiniketan online classes, which is taken by New Vision Academy app. Friends, at the previous videos, we have learned some part of Androcles and the lion. In that part, we learned that there was an Androcle who was a slave, and he left from his clutches of his master and he went into the forest, and in the forest he met with the lion. He treated the paws of lion, and then lion and Androcles become close friends. They went both everywhere. So now what happened next? We are going to learn that in this video. Look at the paragraph, next paragraph, page number 8, पेज नंबर 8 वरचा तिसरा पॅराग्राफ पहा. तिथून पुढे आपला भाग राहिलेला होता. In the meanwhile, Androcles' master had complained to the authorities that his slave Androcles had run away. Soldiers were sent in all directions to capture Androcles. They searched for him high and low, but couldn't find him. At last, they came to the forest where Androcles lived. Now I will translate this paragraph into English. In the meanwhile means at that time when there were the Androcles and the lion became friend. At that time, at the opposite side of the Androcles master side, in the meanwhile, Androcles master had complained. He had the complaint about that Androcles who had run away from the clutches of him, and he complained to the authority of their kingdom. He complained, maybe there may be some king at that time. He complained to the king or maybe authorities of that time about his slaves. Androcle had run away. He flew from him. So he complained to the authorities. Who had complained? Androcles' master had complained to the authorities about the Androcles had run away. Soldiers were sent in all directions to capture Androcles. Then authorities had sent the soldiers of his authorities to the all directions to capture the Androcles. The soldiers were sent everywhere to capture that Androcles. They searched for him high and low, but couldn't find him. The soldiers searched Androcles everywhere. High and low means everywhere, and they couldn't find the Androcles. Where was the Androcles? They couldn't find, and at last they came to the forest where Androcles lived, and lastly they went into the forest, and in that forest Androcles was living with the lion. So at last they went in that forest. Who went? The soldiers went in that forest. Now I will translate it into Marathi. In the meanwhile म्हणजे मध्यंतरीच्या काळामध्ये, म्हणजे जेव्हा Androcles आणि lion हे मित्र बनले इकडं, त्या कालावधीमध्ये Androcles master had complained to the authorities that his slaves Androcles had run away. Androclesच्या मालकाने, जो त्याचा मालक होता, त्या मालकाने कंप्लेंट केली, तक्रार केली. कुठं? टू द ऑथॉरिटीज, त्या अधिकाऱ्याकडे कंप्लेंट केली. दॅट हिज काय कंप्लेंट केली की त्यांचा जो स्लेव होता, गुलाम, Androcles नावाचा जो गुलाम आहे, तो गुलाम त्यांच्याकडून पळून गेलाय. याबद्दल त्यांनी त्या ऑथॉरिटीज कडे, काही अधिकाऱ्याकडे किंवा त्या ठिकाणी त्या काळामध्ये राजे वगैरे असतील, त्यांच्याकडे त्यांनी कंप्लेंट केली. सोल्जर्स वेअर सेंट इन ऑल डायरेक्शन टू कॅप्चर Androcles. आणि कंप्लेंट केल्याबरोबर त्या राजाने जे काही ऑथॉरिटीज असतील त्यांनी त्यांचे शिपाई हे त्या किंगडमच्या सर्व बाजूनी सेंड केले. सर्व दिशेने ते सोल्जर्स पाठवण्यात आले. कशाकरता? टू कॅप्चर Androcles. Androclesला कॅप्चर करण्याकरता, पकडण्याकरता. दे सर्च फॉर हिम हाय अँड लो बट कुडंट फाइंड हिम. आणि ते सर्व सोल्जर्स, सर्व सैनिकांनी त्या Androclesला इकडे तिकडे सर्च केलं, शोधलं. हाय अँड लो मीन्स सर्वत्र, इकडे तिकडे सर्व बाजूने त्यांनी सर्च केला. बट Androcles कुडंट फाइंड हिम, परंतु Androcles त्यांना सापडला नाही. अँड ऍट लास्ट दे केम टू द फॉरेस्ट वेअर Androcles लिव्ड. आणि अखेरीस ते त्या जंगलामध्ये आले, ज्या जंगलामध्ये Androcles राहत होता, त्या जंगलामध्ये ते आले. ते सैनिक त्या Androclesला पकडण्यामध्ये त्या जंगलामध्ये आले. नाउ लुक ॲट द नेक्स्ट पॅराग्राफ. It so happened that Androcles had gone out alone that day while the lion rested near the cave. Both of them fell into the hands of the soldiers. The soldiers took them back to the city. They put Androcles in chains in a prison. The lion was caged. Now, when they reached into the forest, it so happened that Androcles had gone out alone at that time, that day, while the lion rested near the caves. And when the soldiers came into the forest, at that time Androcles went for hunting alone, and the lion was only at that near the cave. He was sleeping at the near the cave. C-A-V. Cave means guha. So Androcles went alone into the forest for hunting or for searching something, and at that time the lion was resting in the near the cave. Both of them fell into the hands of the soldiers. Both lion and Androcles. Lion caught by that soldiers, and also the Androcles also caught by that them. So the both of them means lion and Androcles, they fell into the hands of that soldiers. And that time the soldiers took them to the city. So soldiers took both Androcles and that lion, took them at the city. They put Androcles in chains in prison, and then the soldiers put Androcles into the chain, and they put Androcles into the chain, and also they put Androcles into the prison, and also the lion was caged, and they also put the lion into the cage. So I will translate this paragraph into Marathi. It so happened that Androcles had gone out alone that day while the lion rested near the cave. And it so happened, आणि असं घडलं त्या ठिकाणी की Androcles had gone out alone that day. त्या दिवशी Androcles एकटाच बाहेर फिरण्यासाठी, शिकारीसाठी गेला असेल, काहीतरी आणण्यासाठी गेलेला असेल, आणि त्या वेळेला while the lion rested near the cave, आणि त्यावेळेला मात्र तो lion त्या गुहेच्या जवळ रेस्टिंग करत होता, म्हणजे विश्रांती घेत होता. Both of them fell into the hands of the soldiers. आणि दोघही म्हणजे Androcles बाहेर गेला होता, तो बाहेरल्या बाहेर त्या सैनिकाच्या हाती पकडला गेला, आणि हा जो लॉयन होता, हा लॉयन त्या गुहेच्या बाजूला आराम करत होता, आणि लॉयन ह्या ठिकाणी त्या सोल्जरच्या हाती पकडला गेला. द सोल्जर्स टूक देम बॅक टू द सिटी. आणि सोल्जर्सने त्या दोघांनाही परत शहरामध्ये घेऊन गेले. त्या दोघांनाही माहिती नव्हतं, अँड्रोकॉसला माहित नव्हतं की सिंहाला पकडलंय, आणि सिंहालाही माहिती नव्हतं की अँड्रोकॉसला पकडलेला आहे. सो दे पुट अँड्रोकॉस इन चेन्स इन अ प्रिझन. आणि त्यानंतर त्यांनी अँड्रोकॉसला कैद केलं आणि प्रिझन मध्ये टाकलं, कैदेमध्ये टाकलं. अँड देन द लॉयन वॉज केज्ड. आणि त्याबरोबर लॉयनला सुद्धा केज्ड म्हणजे पिंजऱ्यामध्ये टाकण्यात आलं. नाउ लुक ॲट द नेक्स्ट पॅराग्राफ. इन दोज डेज पीपल who were found to be guilty for a serious crime were fed to wild beasts as punishment. Running away from one's master was a very serious crime at that time. Therefore, Androcles too was to be thrown to the wild beast. In those days, now I will translate this paragraph into English. In those days, at that time, there was a custom, there was a punishment. People who were found to be guilty for a serious crime. If the people found himself guilty for the serious crime, if the people made serious crime, at that time they were fed to the wild beast. They had been fed to the wild beast if they made serious crime as a punishment. That time there was a punishment who made the serious crime. They had to thrown at the wild beast. So running away from one's master was very serious crime at that time. And there was, if a slave ran away from the master, that was very serious crime at that time. So therefore Androcles too was to be thrown to the wild beast. So the Androcles also must have to thrown to the wild beast for eating. Now I will translate this into Marathi. In those days, people who were found to be guilty of a serious crime were fed to wild beast as punishment. In those days, त्या काळामध्ये जे लोक सिरियस गिल्टी म्हणजे एकदम गंभीर, म्हणजे जे अपराधी म्हणून ओळखले जायचे, जे गुन्हेगार असायचे, कशासाठी ऑफ अ सिरियस क्राईम, म्हणजे एखादा गंभीर असा गुन्हा एखाद्या व्यक्तीने केला असेल आणि ते जर अपराधी ठरले असतील तर त्यावेळेस त्या लोकांना दे वेअर फेड टू वाईल्ड बीस्ट ऍज अ पनिशमेंट, त्यांना शिक्षा म्हणून त्यांना जंगली प्राण्यांना खाऊ घालायचे. म्हणजे त्या व्यक्तींना, जे व्यक्ती क्रिमिनल म्हणून सापडला, गुन्हेगार म्हणून सापडला, त्या व्यक्तीला डायरेक्ट त्या जंगली प्राण्याच्या समोर टाकलं जायचं आणि तो जंगली प्राणी त्या व्यक्तीला खाऊन घ्यायचा. अशा पद्धतीचे त्या काळामध्ये सिरियस क्राईम साठी पनिशमेंट होती. रनिंग अवे फ्रॉम वन्स मास्टर वॉज व्हेरी सिरियस क्राईम ऍट दॅट टाइम. आणि त्याबरोबरच एखाद्या मालकापासून एखादा गुलाम जर पळून गेला तर तो सुद्धा खूप गंभीर सिरियस क्राईम म्हणून ओळखला जायचा. आणि म्हणून त्या पळून जाणाऱ्या व्यक्तीला सुद्धा त्या एखाद्या वाईल्ड बीस्ट म्हणजे रानटी प्राणी म्हणजे टायगर असेल, लॉयन असेल, अशा रानटी प्राण्याच्या समोर त्याला खायला दिलं जायचं. देअरफॉर अँड्रोकॉल्स टू वॉज टू बी थ्रोन टू द वाईल्ड बीस्ट. म्हणून अँड्रोकॉल्सला सुद्धा त्या जंगली प्राण्याच्या समोर टाकलं जाणार होतं त्या जंगली प्राण्यांना खाण्यासाठी. Now look at the next page, page number 9 and first paragraph. On the appointed day, the emperor arrived at the circus and took his place. The crowd cheered loudly. The trumpeters blew the trumpet and Androcles was brought into the arena. His chains were unbound. He felt weak and dismayed. He was certain that this was the last day of his life. Now look at the translate into English. On that appointed day, so there was the punishment which is took place at certain day. So on that appointed day, the emperor arrived at the arena, at the circus, and took his circus, and he took his place. Means he seated on his throne. So the crowd cheered loudly when the emperor arrived. When emperor took his place at that time, the crowd which were around that circus, which were around that arena, that time the crowd cheered loudly. It may be there is arena as like that, and there may be from that side people all around. And that time here may be the place of emperor. Emperor seated here. He was emperor, and when emperor seated on his throne, when he took his place, the crowd cheered loudly. Means the crowd which were standing around that arena, they cheered loudly to that emperor. Then trumpeters blew the trumpet. At that time, the trumpeters who were blowing the trumpet, they also blew that trumpet, and also the Androcles was brought into the arena. And that time, the Androcles brought into the arena. That may be the place where Androcles live. And here the place, the lion. So here Androcles put into the arena. Arena means a ground surrounded by seats on all sides for sports and other public events, as like our cricket ground which is surrounded by the seats, and the ground it is called the arena. So the Androcles put into the arena, brought into the arena, and also his chain were unbounded. Means the soldiers unbound his chain, and then he felt weak at that time. Then Androcles felt himself very weak and dismayed. Here dismayed means sad. He felt unhappy at that time, and also he felt weakness to himself, and also he was certain that he felt certain that this was the last day of his life. So he felt very sad, very dismayed at that time, because that day was last day of his life. Now I will translate it into Marathi. On the appointed day, the emperor arrived at the circus and took his place. आणि ठरवलेल्या दिवशी, ज्या दिवशी अँड्रोकॉल्सला पनिशमेंट द्यायची, त्या ठरवलेल्या दिवशी तो जो एम्परर होता, तो एम्परर त्या अरेनामध्ये आला. अरेना म्हणजे अरण्याच्या बाजूला असलेली अरेना म्हणजे सर्कस किंवा आखाडा, जे की त्याच्या सर्व बाजूनी बसण्यासाठी सीट्स असतात म्हणजे पब्लिकला बसण्यासाठी. आणि त्या ठिकाणी तो एम्परर येऊन सिटेड झाला म्हणजे जाग्यावर बसला. आणि बसल्याबरोबर द क्राऊड चिअर लावली. संपूर्ण जी ज्या आजूबाजूला बसले उभं राहिलेली किंवा बसलेली जी काही पब्लिक होती, ही पब्लिक ती गर्दी सर्वांनी त्याचं चिअर केलं, कौतुक केलं. द ट्रम्पेट्स ब्लीव द ट्रम्पेट. द ट्रम्पेटर्स म्हणजे जे ट्रम्पेट वाजवणारे म्हणजे रणशिंग वाजवणारे, जे रणशिंग फुंकणारे जे लोक होते, कर्णा फुंकणारे, त्यांनी तो कर्णा फुंकायला वाजवायला सुरुवात केली. अँड अँड्रोकॉल्स वॉज बॉट इन टू द अरेना. आणि त्याबरोबरच अँड्रोकॉल्सला सुद्धा त्या अरेनामध्ये म्हणजे त्या मैदानामध्ये अँड्रोकॉल्सला आणण्यात आलं. ही चेन्स वेअर अनबाउंड. आणि त्याबरोबर त्याच्या ज्या चेन्स होत्या त्याला जे साखळीला बांधले होतं ते साखळदंड पूर्णतः अनबाउंड केले म्हणजे सोडले गेले. ही फेल्ट वीक अँड डिसमेड. आणि त्यावेळेस मात्र तो स्वतः थोडा त्याला वीकनेस जाणवत होता. अँड ऑल्सो ही फेल्ट डिसमेड म्हणजे दुःख, सॅड म्हणजे दुःखी वाटत होता तो. ही वॉज सर्टेन दॅट दिस वॉज द लास्ट डे ऑफ हिज लाईफ. आणि त्याला नक्की खात्री होती की आजचा जो दिवस होता, आजचा दिवस हा आपल्या आयुष्याचा शेवटचा दिवस आहे, याची खात्री त्याला वाटत होती. नाउ लुक ॲट द नेक्स्ट पॅराग्राफ ऑन पेज नंबर 9. First read it. At the opposite end, a gate was raised up and the ferocious lion was released into the arena. It had been kept hungry to make it more ferocious. Androcles was filled with fear, but he put up a brave front. Now translate this into English. At the opposite end, and there was the Androcles who were unbounded the chain, and that time, that opposite end of the Androcles, there was a lion which put into the arena. And that time, it had been kept hungry to make it more ferocious. The lion had been kept hungry for some days to make it more ferocious. Means they didn't feed to the lion to make it more ferocious. The hungry lion can attack human beings or any other animals very ferociously. So they kept hungry to the lions. Androcles was filled with fear, but he put up a brave front. Put up a brave front means show that one is not afraid, means to gather the courage. So Androcles was filled with fear, and when the lion was released into the arena, that time Androcles filled with fear, but he gathered the courage in front of him. So there was the phrase that put up a brave front, means he put the brave in front of him and he showed that he was not afraid at that time. Now I translate this into Marathi. At the opposite end म्हणजे विरुद्ध बाजूने, कुणाच्या, त्या अँड्रोकॉल्सच्या विरुद्ध बाजूने, गेट वॉज रेज्ड अँड द फ्युरियस लायन वॉज रिलीज्ड इनटू द अरेना. म्हणजे अँड्रोकॉल्सच्या विरुद्ध बाजूचं जे गेट होतं, गेट वर करण्यात आलं आणि तेवढ्यातच त्या अरेनामध्ये म्हणजे त्या आखाड्यामध्ये त्या लॉयनला रिलीज करण्यात आलं म्हणजे मोकळं करण्यात आलं, सोडण्यात आलं. मग त्या अरेनामध्ये त्या सर्कसमध्ये फक्त दोनच आहेत, एक अँड्रोकॉल्स आणि दुसरा लॉयन. इट हॅड बीन केप्ट हंग्री टू मेक इट मोर फ्युरियस. आणि त्या लॉयनला बरेच दिवस झालं उपाशी ठेवलं होतं, कारण तो आणखीनही फ्युरियस व्हावा. फ्युरियस मीन्स फियर्स म्हणजे एकदम क्रूर, एकदम धोकादायक व्हावा, यासाठी त्याला बरेच दिवस हंग्री ठेवण्यात आलं, उपवाशी ठेवण्यात आलं होतं. अँड्रोकॉल्स वॉज फिल्ड विथ फिअर. अँड्रोकॉल्सला सुरुवातीला त्या ठिकाणी भीती वाटली, बट त्या ठिकाणी त्याला भीती वाटत होती, तो भीतीने फिल्डअप झाला, भरून गेला. बट ही पुट अप अ ब्रेव्ह फ्रंट. परंतु त्याने कसल्या प्रकारचा न घाबर म्हणजे मी घाबरत नाही असं त्या ठिकाणी त्याने दाखवून दिलेलं आहे. सो लुक ॲट द नेक्स्ट पॅराग्राफ. The lion saw Androcles and rushed towards him, bounding and roaring. But suddenly it stopped in its track. Then it moved slowly forward. All its race seems to have melted. Androcles saw this too. Each friend recognized the other. Now I will translate this paragraph into English. The lion saw Androcles and rushed towards him, bounding and roaring. And here there was very distance between Androcles and the lion. So lion saw Androcles from the distance and he bounded towards the Androcles. The lion bounded and he also roaring because he was very hungry. He bounded and roared and went into the bounded towards the Androcles. The lion saw that Androcles and he bounded. He rushed towards him, bounding and roaring. But suddenly it stopped in its tracks. But when he came to close that Androcles, when the lion came into the close that Androcles, that time he stopped. He suddenly stopped when he recognized the Androcles. That time the lion stopped on his tracks on the way. Then it moved slowly forward. Then from that place he moved towards the Androcles very slowly. He recognized the Androcles so that he moved very slowly. All its rage seems to have melted. So it seems that the angerness or the fierceness of that lion have to be melted for that time. Androcles saw this too, and that time Androcles also saw the lion, and both friends recognized to each other. Each friend recognized the other. Each and everyone means Androcles recognized the lion and lion recognized the Androcles because both were the friends at that forest. Now I will translate this into Marathi. The lion saw Androcles and rushed towards him, bounding and roaring. Androcles, त्या लॉयनने अँड्रोकॉल्सला दूरवरून पाहिलं आणि दूरवरून पाहिल्यानंतर त्या अँड्रोकॉल्स त्या लॉयनने अँड्रोकॉल्स कडे रसड घेतली, झेप घेतली आणि तो बाउंडिंग म्हणजे उड्या टाकत आणि रोरिंग गर्जना करत त्या अँड्रोकॉल्स कडे त्याला खाण्यासाठी धावत गेला. बट सडनली इट स्टॉप्ड इन इट्स ट्रॅक. परंतु अचानकपणे तो त्याच्या मार्गामध्ये थोडासा थांबला. तो त्या ठिकाणी बाउंडिंग करत जात होता, त्या ठिकाणी थोडासा तो रस्त्यामध्ये थांबला. देन इट मूव्ड स्लोली आणि त्यानंतर तो अतिशय हळुवारपणे त्या अँड्रोकॉल्स कडे गेला. अँड्रोकॉल्स सॉ दिस टू. अँड्रोकॉल्स सुद्धा त्या लॉयनला पाहिलं. इच फ्रेंड रिकॉग्नाइज द अदर. प्रत्येक मित्र दोघेही म्हणजे अँड्रोकॉल्सनी त्या लॉयनला ओळखलं आणि लॉयननी अँड्रोकॉल्सला ओळखलं कारण ते दोघेही त्या जंगलामधले मित्र होते. टू एव्हरीवन्स अमेजमेंट द लॉयन बाउंडेड टुवर्ड्स अँड्रोकॉल्स अगेन. But when it reached him, it began to purr and rub its nose against him. Androcles hugged the lion. He wept with relief and joy. To everyone's amazement, and that time each and everyone became amazing. Each and everyone feel amazed because the lion bounded towards Androcles again. From that place, the lion went bounding towards the Androcles. But when the lion reached towards to the Androcles, that time it began to purr. He only began to purr and also he rubbed his nose against the Androcles. Means the lion rubbed his nose. Lion recognized the Androcles and that time the lion rubbed his nose against that Androcles and Androcles hugged the lion and that time Androcles also hugged that lion. He wept with relief and joy and that time the Androcles wept with relief. He felt very relief and also he felt joy because the lion was his friend. Now I will translate this paragraph into Marathi. To everyone's amazement, प्रत्येकाला आश्चर्य वाटत होतं. प्रत्येकामध्ये आश्चर्याची भावना निर्माण झाली कारण the lion bounded towards Androcles again. कारण तो लॉयन त्या अँड्रोकॉल्स कडे बाउंडेड उड्या टाकत गेला. बट वेन इट रीच्ड हिम. परंतु जेव्हा तो त्या अँड्रोकॉल्स पर्यंत जाऊन पोहोचला, अँड्रोकॉल्सच्या समोर गेला, त्यावेळेस मात्र इट बिगेन टू पर. तो आता फक्त गुरगुरत होता अँड रब इट्स नोज अगेन्स्ट हिम. तो मात्र त्या लॉयन अँड्रोकॉल्सच्या समोर आपलं नाक रबड करत होता. रब मीन्स घासत होता. अँड्रोकॉल्स हग्ड द लॉयन आणि अँड्रोकॉल्सने सुद्धा त्या लॉयनला मिठी मारली. ही वेप्ट विथ रिलीफ अँड जॉय. आणि त्यावेळेसला मात्र अँड्रोकॉल्सला अतिशय आनंद झाला. म्हणजे तो आनंद अश्रू ढाळत होता. म्हणजे थोडक्यात तो रडला. म्हणजे एकदम त्याला वाटलं की आता आपली मोकळीच झाली आणि आपल्याला आनंदही झाला. यामुळे अँड्रोकॉल्स थोडंसं त्या ठिकाणी रडला. लुक ॲट द नेक्स्ट पॅराग्राफ. द ऑडियन्स इन्क्लुडिंग द एम्परर वॉच्ड दिस टेंडर साइट in great wonder. People began to cheer Androcles and asked for his release. The emperor asked the Androcles to explain the lion's strange behavior. When he heard the whole story, the emperor was also moved by the gratitude and friendship between man and beast. He ordered that Androcles should be set free. He was no longer be slave. Now I will translate this paragraph into English. The audience means there were the crowd around that arena, all the audience, and including that audience there was the emperor himself. They watched this tender sight in great wonder. Each and everyone were watching this sight very wonderfully. People began to cheer Androcles and asked for his release. And that time when Androcles hugged to the lion, that time the people began to cheer about the Androcles and they demanded towards the emperor that Androcles must be released. The emperor asked Androcles to explain the lion's strange behavior. When Androcles put against the emperor, put in front of the emperor, that time the emperor asked Androcles why the lion behaved strange with you. That time the Androcles, that time when he heard the story, whole story, when the Androcles told the whole story at the which took place at the forest, that time the emperor was also moved by the gratitude and friendship between the man and beast. And that time the emperor was also moved by, means have strong feelings. That time the emperor also overwhelmed by the gratitude towards the man and gratitude and friendship by between man and that animal. He ordered that Androcles should be set free, and that time the emperor gave the order that the Androcles should be freed at that time. He would no longer be slave, and he also announced that the Androcles will no longer be slave from that time. Now I will translate it into Marathi. Audience including the emperor, म्हणजे त्या ठिकाणी बाजूला असलेले जे ऑडियन्स होते प्रेक्षक, त्यामध्ये तो एम्परर सुद्धा वॉच्ड दिस टेंडर साइट इन ग्रेट वंडर. ते सर्वजण अतिशय ते जे टेंडर साइट होते म्हणजे नाजूक असे दृश्य ते अतिशय वंडरनी म्हणजे आश्चर्यचकित होऊन ते पाहत होते सर्वजण. पीपल बिगेन टू चिअर अँड्रोकॉल्स अँड आस्क फॉर हिज रिलीफ. आणि त्यावेळेस मात्र सर्व लोक त्या अँड्रोकॉल्सची प्रशंसा करत होते आणि त्याबरोबरच त्यांनी अँड्रोकॉल्सला मुक्त करावे यासाठी सर्वजण मागणी करत होते. द एम्परर आस्क्ड अँड्रोकॉल्स टू एक्सप्लेन द लॉयन्स स्ट्रेंज बिहेवियर. आणि त्यानंतर त्या एम्पररनी, त्या सम्राटांनी त्या अँड्रोकॉल्सला विचारलं की तो लॉयन अशा वेगळ्या पद्धतीने तुझ्या बरोबर बिहेव का केलं, म्हणजे त्या लॉयननी विचित्र पद्धतीची वर्तवणूक तुझ्यासोबत का केली, म्हणजे त्या लॉयननी तुला का बरं मारलं नाही. When he heard the whole story, the emperor was also moved by the gratitude and friendship between man and beast. आणि जेव्हा त्या अँड्रोकॉल्सनी संपूर्ण स्टोरी सांगितली त्या फॉरेस्ट मध्ये घडलेली, त्यावेळेस मात्र तो एम्परर ओव्हरवेल्म झाला, म्हणजे मूड बाय म्हणजे हिलावून गेला, भारावून गेला. कशाबद्दल? बाय द ग्रॅटिट्यूड अँड फ्रेंडशिप. त्या दोन प्राण्या म्हणजे मानव आणि प्राणी यांच्यामध्ये असलेली जी फ्रेंडशिप आहे, मैत्री, आणि त्यांच्यामध्ये असलेली एकमेकाबद्दलची कृतज्ञता, ह्या गोष्टीमुळे तो एम्परर, तो सम्राट भारावून गेला. ही ऑर्डर दॅट अँड्रोकॉल्स शुड बी सेट फ्री. आणि त्यानंतर त्यांनी ऑर्डर केले की इथून पुढे अँड्रोकॉल्सला मोकळं केलं पाहिजे. ही वुड नो लॉंगर बी स्लेव्ह. इथून पुढे तो गुलाम राहणार नाही, तो मुक्तपणे जगू शकतो, अशी ऑर्डर त्या एम्पररने दिली गेली. Now look at the next paragraph. When the emperor asked Androcles what other reward he would like, Androcles replied that he did not want anything for himself, but he wanted the lion to be set free too. And now look at the English translation. When the emperor asked Androcles what other reward he would like, and that time the emperor gave the announcement each and everyone that the Androcles will never be slave from that time. And when the emperor also asked the lion what other reward would you like, he also offered the Androcles the next reward, but Androcles replied that he did not want anything for himself. Androcles replied to the emperor that he didn't want anything other for himself, but he requested he wanted that the lion should be set free with him. Now I will translate this into Marathi. When the emperor asked the Androcles, जेव्हा एम्पररनी अँड्रोकॉल्सला विचारलं what other reward he would like, तुला आणखी कोणतं रिवॉर्ड पाहिजे, कोणतं पारितोषिक पाहिजे, हे एम्पररनी त्या अँड्रोकॉल्सला विचारलं. त्यावेळेस मात्र अँड्रोकॉल्स रिप्लाइड दॅट ही डिड नॉट वॉन्ट एनिथिंग फॉर हिमसेल्फ. अँड्रोकॉल्सने उत्तर दिलं की मला स्वतःसाठी काही नको, बट ही वॉन्टेड द लॉयन टू बी सेट फ्री टू. त्याने अशी मागणी केली की माझ्याबरोबर त्या लॉयनला सुद्धा काय करा, मोकळं करा, लॉयनला सुद्धा पिंजऱ्यातून बाहेर सोडा. द टू फ्रेंड्स वेंट बॅक टू द फॉरेस्ट टू लिव्ह अ फ्री लाईफ. आणि त्यानंतर ते दोन्ही बोथ द अँड्रोकॉल्स अँड द लॉयन वेंट इन टू द फॉरेस्ट टू लिव्ह द फ्री लाईफ. त्यानंतर अँड्रोकॉल्स आणि तो लॉयन हे दोघंही जंगलामध्ये त्या दोघांनाही सोडण्यात आलं आणि ते दोघेही त्या जंगलामध्ये मुक्त असं जीवन जगू लागले. अशा पद्धतीनं माणूस आणि प्राणी या दोघांमधले असलेली फ्रेंडशिप, या दोघांमध्ये असलेले एकमेकांबद्दल बाउंड प्रेम हे ह्या धड्यामधून व्यक्त केले गेलेलं आहे. आणि अशा पद्धतीने आपला अँड्रोकॉल्स अँड लॉयन हा चॅप्टर संपलेला आहे.